People ask me sometimes how I built what I built. They see the network, the conferences, the curated circles where a single introduction can change a career. They see the waiting lists, the referrals that take months to clear, the fact that I decide who gets access to rooms that most people don't even know exist. What they don't see is why I built it this way. They don't see the night in April of my junior year at Northwestern, standing in front of 200 people, while my closest friends systematically destroyed my reputation to save their own. They don't see the 4 years after that, where I couldn't bring myself to trust anyone enough to have a real conversation. They don't see the specific architecture of isolation I constructed, brick by brick, until I became someone who could control access to opportunity itself. And they definitely don't see the moment, years later, when those same friends tried to call in favors they thought they'd earned by proximity. Let me take you back. I grew up in Evanston, just north of Chicago. My parents were both academics. My father taught economics at DePaul. My mother was a research librarian at the University of Chicago. We lived in a modest house near campus, and my childhood was filled with the kind of quiet intellectual rigor that makes you good at school without really trying. I was the kid who actually read the assigned books, who enjoyed writing papers, who found a strange satisfaction in the architecture of a well-constructed argument. I wasn't particularly cool, but I wasn't bullied either. I existed in that comfortable middle zone of high school social life where you have friends, you're part of things, but you're not driving the culture. When I got into Northwestern for college, staying local felt right. I could keep my part-time job at the bookstore, stay close to my parents who were getting older, and attend a school with serious academic credentials. I declared a major in organizational behavior with a minor in communication studies, the kind of degree that sounds soft until you realize it's essentially the study of how power moves through human systems. I should have paid more attention to my own coursework. I met them during the first week of freshman year. Alexander Feldman was my roommate, assigned randomly by the university housing system in what I later understood to be either cosmic joke or perfect irony. He was from New York, old money that he wore like a comfortable jacket, never quite showing off, but impossible to miss. He had that effortless charisma that some people are born with, the ability to walk into a room and immediately become its center without appearing to try. James Hartwell lived down the hall. He was pre-law, viciously smart, the kind of person who could argue any position with equal conviction. He came from Dallas oil money, but presented himself as self-made, always talking about his summer internships and networking strategies. Charles Donnelly was the athlete, soccer scholarship, Division I prospects, genuinely talented, but also genuinely kind in a way that felt rare among competitive athletes. He was the one who made the group feel balanced, like we weren't just a collection of ambitious kids grinding toward resume lines. And then there was Theodore Rosen, who transferred in second semester from Berkeley. Theodore was the ideas guy, always spinning plans, seeing opportunities, connecting dots that others missed. He was studying economics and computer science, already talking about startups before most of us understood what venture capital meant. We became inseparable, not in the fraternity way. We never rushed, never felt the need for institutional belonging. We created our own structure, study groups that turned into late-night philosophical debates, weekend trips to Chicago proper, exploring neighborhoods and music venues, a running inside joke about starting a consulting firm that would disrupt organizational dysfunction, which was really just us making fun of the buzzwords everyone else used. By sophomore year, we'd developed our own ecosystem. We took classes together when we could, occupied the same corner of the library, threw parties that were actually interesting, because Theodore always knew people from weird corners of campus. Alexander's family connections meant we got into things we shouldn't have been able to access. Gallery openings, invitation-only lectures, once a fundraiser dinner, where I sat 3 seats away from a former Secretary of State. I was happy. Genuinely, unself-consciously happy in a way I hadn't been since childhood. I should have known it couldn't last. The idea started junior year, fall semester. We were sitting in Theodore's apartment. He'd moved off campus into a place his parents bought as an investment. And James brought up the university's annual Innovation Summit. It was a big deal, a 3-day conference that brought together students, faculty, local business, leaders, and usually a few notable speakers. Students could submit proposals to organize tracks or sessions, and getting selected was a legitimate resume builder. "We should do something," James said. "We've been talking about organizational dysfunction for 2 years. Let's actually propose a track." Theodore immediately saw the angle. Leadership development through practical systems thinking. We could get corporate sponsors, bring in real practitioners, make it the most valuable track at the whole summit. Charles was skeptical. That's a lot of work, like hundreds of hours of work. Distributed across 5 people, Alexander countered. And it's the kind of thing that opens doors. You think Morgan Stanley cares about your GPA? They care about whether you can execute on something ambitious. I was quiet, listening, already mentally organizing what it would take. Proposals were due in 6 weeks. We'd need a detailed outline, speaker confirmations, budget projections, proof of concept. "I'm in," I said. "But we need to be realistic about timeline and division of labor." That's how it started. 5 friends, 1 ambitious plan, and the kind of naive confidence that comes from never having failed at anything that mattered. We divided responsibilities based on strengths. Theodore handled concept development and corporate outreach. He was already networking with startup founders and had the vocabulary to pitch to business sponsors. James took on the legal and logistical framework: permits, insurance, contracts with speakers, university approval processes. Alexander managed relationships and high-value speaker recruitment. His family knew people, and he knew how to leverage those connections without making it weird. Charles handled marketing and student engagement. He was popular in ways the rest of us weren't. Knew people across different campus communities, could make our track feel accessible rather than elitist. I was project manager and primary author. I built the timeline, tracked deliverables, wrote the actual proposal document, and maintained the master planning spreadsheet that governed everything. For 6 weeks, we worked like we'd never worked before. I pulled multiple all-nighters refining the proposal language, making sure every section flowed, that our educational philosophy was clear, that the budget was realistic but impressive. Theodore secured preliminary interest from 3 major consulting firms. Alexander got soft commitments from 2 executives who were Northwestern alumni. James navigated the bureaucratic maze of university event approval. Charles created a pre-launch marketing campaign that generated buzz before we'd even been selected. We submitted on deadline, confident. The proposal was 93 pages. We'd included letters of support, detailed session outlines, a comprehensive risk management plan, and financial projections showing we could be revenue neutral while providing value to 500 students. 3 weeks later, we got the acceptance email. We were one of 6 selected tracks. We had 6 months to deliver everything we'd promised. The next semester was chaos, but productive chaos. We met 3 times a week, assigned action items, held each other accountable. The dynamic worked because we each genuinely respected what the others brought. When Theodore secured a $20,000 sponsorship from a management consulting firm, we celebrated together. When James navigated a complicated insurance requirement, we acknowledged the save. I coordinated everything, maintaining the master timeline, identifying bottlenecks, redistributing work when someone fell behind. It was exhausting but satisfying in the way that building something real is always satisfying. By March, 2 months before the summit, we were in good shape. 12 confirmed speakers, including 3 C-level executives and a former university president. 8 planned sessions spanning 2 days. Marketing materials, distributed across campus. Pre-registration numbers that exceeded our projections by 40%. That's when the first crack appeared. Theodore missed a meeting. Not unusual, he was juggling multiple commitments. But then he missed the follow-up, and when I finally reached him, he was vague about deliverables. "I've been slammed," he said, "but it's handled. Trust me." I did trust him. That was the problem. 2 weeks later, I discovered that the corporate sponsor he'd secured, the $20,000 commitment that was funding our entire speaker travel budget, hadn't actually signed a contract. Theodore had verbal agreement, enthusiastic emails, even a preliminary wire transfer form, but no executed contract, which meant no legal obligation, which meant no guaranteed money. When I brought it up in a group meeting, Theodore was defensive. "These things take time. Corporate legal processes are slow. The money's coming." "But do we have backup?" I pressed. "If they pull out, we can't cover speaker travel. We've made commitments." Alexander jumped in. "We're not going to catastrophize. Theodore knows these people. It's going to happen." I let it go. I shouldn't have. 6 weeks before the summit, the sponsor pulled out. Not maliciously. The executive who'd championed the partnership left the company, and the new leadership decided to redirect community investment priorities. Professional, apologetic, final. We were $20,000 short, with confirmed speakers expecting first-class travel from 3 different coasts. I called an emergency meeting. "We need to tell the university," I said. "Renegotiate scope, reduce speaker count, adjust the budget. It's manageable if we're honest about it now." Theodore exploded. "Are you insane? We tell them we can't deliver, they'll pull our track. 6 months of work gone." "We can't deliver what we promised," I shot back. "Not without the funding. That's just math." James sided with Theodore. "There has to be another way. We find a different sponsor, we scale back quietly, we make it work." "In 6 weeks?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not realistic." Charles, the mediator, tried to find middle ground. "What if we each put in some personal money? Cover the gap temporarily while we find alternatives." $4,000 each? I looked around the room. "You have $4,000 lying around?" Alexander did. His family did, but he was quiet. "We're not giving up," Theodore said. "We find a solution. That's what we do." I went home that night with a sick feeling in my stomach. Not because the problem was unsolvable, but because I could see how it would end. We'd push forward, hope for a miracle, and when the miracle didn't materialize, we'd face consequences we weren't prepared for. I should have walked away then. I spent the next week developing 3 alternative proposals. Reduce speaker count. Focus on local practitioners who wouldn't require travel budgets. Convert one summit day to a student-led format, cutting costs by 60%. Partner with another track to share resources and split headliner expenses. I presented all 3 at our next meeting. Theodore dismissed them immediately. "These are all retreat strategies. We're not retreating." "They're not retreat, they're adaptation," I countered. "We deliver something excellent within our actual means." "We deliver what we promised," James said. "Or we deliver nothing. Those are the options." "That's insane. That's commitment." Alexander finally spoke. "I think what James means is that we've built expectations. Scaling back now damages credibility more than canceling would." "So we cancel?" I was lost. "So we execute," Theodore said. I've got leads on 2 other sponsors. Give me 3 weeks. Against my better judgment, I agreed. 3 weeks later, he had nothing concrete. We were 2 weeks out from the summit. Speakers were booking flights, expecting reimbursement. Students had registered. The university was promoting our track in their publicity materials. We were committed to costs we couldn't cover and deliverables we couldn't meet. I went to Alexander privately. "We have to tell someone," I said. "Your family has university connections. Can you reach out, explain the situation, ask for emergency bridge funding?" He looked uncomfortable. "That's not really how it works." "How what works?" "The connections aren't for fixing mistakes. They're for opening doors, not for rescue. This isn't rescue, it's problem solving. It's the same thing." He met my eyes. "Look, I'll ask, but don't expect anything." He never asked. I found out later he never intended to. 10 days before the summit, the first speaker canceled. Not because of money. She'd booked her own travel, expecting reimbursement on arrival. She canceled because our student marketing team, stretched thin, had miscommunicated session details, and she felt the organization was not consistent with her standards. It was a disaster, but it was also a symptom of a larger problem. We were failing, slowly and visibly, and none of us wanted to admit it. I called a meeting. All 4 of them were there, looking exhausted. "We need to go to the university administration," I said. "Today. Explain what happened, take responsibility, and ask for help restructuring." "Absolutely not," Theodore said immediately. "Why not?" "Because that's surrender. Because that's putting our names on a failure that'll follow us. Do you know how competitive grad school admissions are? How much employment background checks matter? We put our names on a public failure at this level, it sticks." "More than delivering nothing sticks," I was almost yelling. "More than breaching contracts with speakers sticks." James stepped in, voice calm and lawyerly. "Here's what I think happened. The university approval process was flawed. They didn't properly vet our budget. The corporate sponsor withdrawal was beyond our control. The executive leaving was unforeseeable. We were given insufficient support and impossible timelines." I stared at him. None of that is true." "It's true enough," he said. "It's a narrative that protects us." By blaming the university? By contextualizing failure in terms that don't make us look incompetent. Charles looked miserable, but didn't argue. Alexander studied his hands. "And what about the actual summit?" I asked. "It's in 10 days. What do we deliver?" Theodore leaned back. "We deliver a modified version. Reduce sessions, use faculty instead of external speakers. Make it work with available resources. It won't be what we promised, but it'll be something." "That's still not addressing the financial commitments we made." "Those are individual contract issues," James said. "Not our legal responsibility as students. The university assumed financial liability when they approved the track. Let them handle it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were my friends, people I'd trusted, and they were constructing an elaborate justification for abandoning responsibility. "I'm not doing this," I said. "Doing what?" Alexander finally looked up. "Participating in this. If you're going forward with that plan, you're doing it without me." Theodore's expression hardened. "You're seriously walking away? Right now?" "I'm seriously refusing to lie to the university and breach commitments to speakers. Yes." "After 6 months of work, after everything we've built together." "We haven't built anything," I said. "We've created a disaster that you're trying to paper over with narrative." "So what are you going to do?" James asked, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "Go to administration yourself? Tell them your version of events?" "I'm going to tell them the truth, that we mismanaged the budget, lost funding, and need to restructure or cancel. Throwing us under the bus to save yourself." Theodore stood up. That's what this is. That's the opposite of what this is. You know what? Theodore's voice was rising. I've been doing the actual work on this project. The hard work of building relationships and securing resources while you've been making spreadsheets. And now, when it gets difficult, you're bailing. I've been managing this entire project. You've been micromanaging, Alexander interrupted, questioning every decision, undermining confidence, and now trying to sabotage the whole thing. I looked at Charles, waiting for him to say something reasonable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm out, I said. Good luck with whatever you're planning. I walked out. I should have gone to administration that night. Should have sent an email, made a phone call, documented everything. But I didn't. Part of it was shock. I couldn't quite believe that 4 people I'd trusted completely had turned on me in unison. Part of it was exhaustion. I'd been running on adrenaline for months, and part of it was doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being too rigid, too unwilling to adapt, too afraid of failure. I spent 2 days in a fog, attending classes, avoiding campus spaces where I might run into any of them, trying to figure out what to do. Then I got the email. It was from the university's student activities office, requesting my presence at a meeting. Immediately, required attendance. I knew before I walked in what had happened. The meeting was in a conference room in the student union. Present, the director of student activities, the associate dean of students, the faculty advisor for the Innovation Summit, and a woman from University Legal Affairs. Not present, Alexander, James, Theodore, or Charles. The director started. Thank you for coming. We need to discuss some serious concerns that have been raised about the leadership development track. My mouth went dry. We've received reports from your fellow organizers that there have been significant financial mismanagement issues, specifically that you, as project manager, failed to secure proper contracts with sponsors and made unauthorized commitments beyond the approved budget. I couldn't speak. The faculty advisor pulled out documents. According to the documentation provided, you had primary responsibility for financial oversight and failed to properly communicate funding shortfalls until it was too late to address them. That's not, I started, but the legal affairs woman held up a hand. We're also hearing concerns that when the problems became apparent, you threatened to sabotage the track rather than working collaboratively to find solutions. Who told you that? We've received consistent reports from 4 separate organizers, the director said, all independently confirming the same sequence of events. 4 separate reports, independently. They'd coordinated their story and submitted it as if it were objective truth. I tried to explain, tried to walk through the actual timeline, Theodore's sponsor failure, my alternative proposals, their rejection of restructuring, the impossible position we were in. The faculty advisor took notes, but looked skeptical. The director's expression never changed. The legal affairs woman seemed primarily concerned with limiting university liability. Here's the situation, the director finally said. The summit is in 8 days. Your fellow organizers have proposed a scaled-down version of the track that's feasible within budget. They're willing to move forward and deliver something to the students who registered. However, they don't feel they can work effectively with you given the trust issues. Trust issues that they created, I said. That's disputed, the legal affairs woman said. And frankly, what matters now is minimizing harm. We have students who registered, speakers who have commitments, and a public event with the university's reputation attached. The associate dean leaned forward. We're removing you from the organizing team, effective immediately. You'll receive documentation of this decision and the rationale. You're welcome to submit a written response, which will be considered as part of the record. You're believing their version without any verification? We're making a practical decision in a time-sensitive situation, the director said. 4 organizers are willing to move forward. 1 is not. The math is straightforward. The math is 4 people protecting themselves by scapegoating one. That's your perspective, the associate dean said. They have a different perspective. We're not adjudicating absolute truth here. We're managing a crisis. The meeting ended. I was formally removed from the track I'd spent 6 months building. The documentation would note leadership conflicts and financial mismanagement concerns as the reason. It would become part of my permanent student record. I should have fought it. Should have hired a lawyer, demanded a formal hearing, forced them to prove their accusations. But I was 20 years old, exhausted, and genuinely unsure whether I was right anymore. When 4 people you trust tell the same story, when administrators believe them over you, when every institutional structure sides against you, you start to question your own memory. Maybe I had micromanaged. Maybe I had been inflexible. Maybe walking out was the real betrayal. The summit happened. Their scaled-down version used entirely faculty speakers, had minimal attendance, and received lukewarm reviews. But it happened. They delivered something. And in the institutional record, they were the ones who salvaged a difficult situation after I had failed in my responsibilities. I saw them around campus occasionally. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't make eye contact. It was as if I'd never existed. 3 weeks after the summit, I was sitting in the library when I overheard Charles talking to someone I didn't know. Yeah, we had to remove one of the organizers. He just couldn't handle the pressure. Started making wild accusations. Tried to sabotage the whole thing. It was ugly, but we made it work. He said it casually, like it was an amusing anecdote, like rewriting history was just a normal thing people did. That's when something broke in me, not dramatically, not with anger or pain, just a quiet recognition that I had fundamentally misunderstood how the world worked. I'd thought friendship meant loyalty, that truth mattered, that institutions would care about what actually happened. I'd been wrong about all of it. I stopped talking to people, not in an obvious way. I still attended classes, participated when required, maintained a functional surface level of social engagement. But I stopped trusting, stopped sharing anything real, stopped allowing anyone close enough to hurt me. I moved off campus into a studio apartment in Rogers Park, away from campus neighborhoods where I might run into anyone. I deleted social media. I stopped attending events, joining clubs, accepting invitations. When classmates tried to make conversation, I was polite but distant. When professors encouraged networking, I nodded and ignored them. I became a ghost who attended university. My grades didn't suffer. If anything, they improved. Without social obligations, I had infinite time for coursework. I wrote papers that professors called exceptional. I aced exams. I graduated summa cum laude with a thesis on organizational power structures that my advisor wanted to submit for publication. I declined. I didn't want my name on anything. The day after graduation, I left Evanston and didn't look back. For 2 years, I barely spoke to anyone. I took a research position at a think tank in Washington, D.C., analyzing organizational behavior in federal agencies. The work was solitary: data analysis, report writing, occasional presentations to people who didn't care about my personal life. Perfect. I lived alone, worked alone, spent weekends reading in my apartment or walking through the city without destination. I was functional, productive, and completely isolated. Looking back, I recognize it as depression. At the time, it felt like clarity. The work was interesting despite my emotional flatness. I was studying how information and power moved through bureaucratic systems, how decisions got made, how certain people accumulated influence while others remained invisible. I was good at it because I had no emotional investment in the findings. I could see patterns that others missed because I wasn't trying to protect anyone's feelings or maintain comfortable illusions. My supervisor, a woman named Eleanor Monroe, who'd spent 30 years studying institutional behavior, noticed. "You have a gift for seeing structure," she told me after I'd submitted a report on interagency communication failures. "Most people get caught up in personality conflicts or political agendas. You see the architecture underneath." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's not entirely a compliment," she continued. "The best researchers maintain some connection to the human element. Your work is brilliant but cold, like you're studying aliens rather than people." She wasn't wrong. The shift started in my 3rd year at the think tank. Eleanor assigned me to a project studying professional networks, specifically how access to information and opportunity distributed through formal and informal connections. I was supposed to analyze network density, centrality measures, information flow patterns. Instead, I became obsessed with the question of gatekeeping. Who controlled access? How did people become nodes that others had to flow through? What gave someone the power to include or exclude? I read everything. Network theory, social capital research, studies on elite formation, ethnographies of professional communities. I studied how private clubs maintained exclusivity, how venture capital networks self-replicated, how academic disciplines controlled intellectual credibility. I learned that power wasn't about being the smartest or working the hardest. Power was about controlling access to rooms where decisions got made. And I realized something. Nobody had ever taught me this. Not in my organizational behavior degree, not in my childhood of academic values, not in my friendship group that had betrayed me. I'd spent 24 years believing that merit and truth mattered, that good work would be recognized, that honesty would be rewarded. I'd been set up to lose, but now I understood the game, and I was good at systems. I started small. DC runs on networks. Who you know determines what you access. I began mapping them, not for research but for understanding. I identified the key connectors, the people who sat at the intersection of multiple communities, the gatekeepers who controlled introduction pathways. Then I studied how they operated. I noticed patterns. The best networkers didn't network constantly. They were selective, intentional, almost stingy with their social capital. They said no more than yes. They created scarcity around their own access, making introduction to them valuable precisely because it was difficult to obtain. They built waiting lists. They had application processes. They made people prove they were worth knowing before granting access. I started experimenting. I'd been invited to a monthly salon, one of those DC things where think tank people and government staffers and journalists gathered to discuss policy in someone's expensive apartment. I'd been going for a year, mostly observing, occasionally contributing sharp analysis that made people remember me. I invited someone, a junior staffer from the Department of Education who I'd met at a conference, smart, ambitious, doing interesting work on federal grant structures. I told the salon host she was someone worth knowing. She attended, made excellent contributions, and afterward thanked me profusely. The following month, when she wanted to bring her own guest, she asked my permission first. I'd created a dependency. I did it again and again. Carefully, slowly, I became someone who could provide access to valuable spaces. I never asked for anything directly. I just created obligation through generosity, making people feel they owed me by giving them things they wanted. Within 18 months, I was a connector. People sought me out, asked for introductions, wanted my blessing to attend events. I said yes maybe 40% of the time, making each yes more valuable because no was always possible. I was building leverage. At 27, I left the think tank. Not for another job. I didn't need one anymore. I'd been consulting on the side, helping organizations understand their network structures, advising on community building strategies. The consulting income exceeded my think tank salary. More importantly, I'd accumulated something more valuable than money, a database. Over 4 years, I'd mapped thousands of professional connections. Who knew whom, who'd worked where, who'd gone to school together, who'd served on what boards. I'd documented expertise, interests, career trajectories, ambitions. I'd built a living map of how influence moved through professional DC, and I'd kept meticulous records of every introduction I'd made, every favor granted, every access point I'd provided. I understood something that most people didn't. Professional networks weren't social. They were transactional systems, poorly disguised as friendships. People didn't help each other out of kindness. They helped each other to build capital, create obligation, and maintain position. I decided to build a network where the transactional nature was acknowledged rather than hidden, where access was explicit, where gatekeeping was the point. I called it the assembly. The concept was simple, an invitation-only professional network that facilitated high-value introductions between vetted members. No website, no publicity, no advertising. You couldn't apply, you could only be nominated by an existing member, and even nomination didn't guarantee inclusion. I personally evaluated every potential member, looking at expertise, trajectory, what they could offer the network, what they needed from it. The value proposition was equally simple: access to people you couldn't reach otherwise, introductions that carried weight because I'd personally vouched for the connection, and membership in a community where everyone was pre-vetted for quality. The cost: you granted me the same gatekeeping power over your network that I granted you over mine. If I introduced you to someone, you acknowledged the debt. If you wanted to introduce another member to someone in your network, you cleared it with me first. I was creating a system where I controlled every connection. People thought I was building community. I was building architecture. The first members were people I'd helped over the years in DC. I sent 15 invitations, 12 accepted. We met monthly in a private room at a restaurant I'd cultivated a relationship with. The format was structured: brief updates from each member on what they were working on, explicit requests for specific connections or expertise, and time for organic conversation. After 3 meetings, the members started seeing results: introductions that led to job offers, connections that became partnerships, access to information that changed project trajectories. They started asking if they could nominate people. I developed an application process. Nominees submitted a 1-page summary of expertise and what they'd contribute to the network. Existing members wrote sponsorship letters. I conducted personal interviews, 30 minutes each, evaluating not just credentials but fit. I accepted maybe 1 in 5. The rejections made membership more valuable. People started name-dropping the assembly in professional contexts, signaling their inclusion in something exclusive. The mystique grew. By the second year, I had 80 members across different sectors: government, nonprofits, academia, private industry. I'd organized them into cohorts based on experience level and focus area, creating multiple layers of access. Junior members could attend general gatherings. Senior members got invited to smaller, higher-value sessions. The inner circle, maybe 15 people, had my personal cell number and could request direct introductions outside the formal structure. I never asked for money. The network ran on social capital, which was more valuable and harder to quantify. I'd built a machine for controlling access to opportunity, and I was the only one who understood how all the pieces fit together. By 30, I'd expanded beyond DC. The assembly had chapters in New York, San Francisco, Boston, and Chicago. Each city had its own coordinator, someone I'd personally trained in the methodology, but I maintained final approval over all memberships. We weren't the biggest network, we weren't the most famous, but we were arguably the most selective, and therefore the most valuable. Membership in the assembly signaled something that money couldn't buy, that someone with serious judgment had evaluated you and decided you were worth knowing. I'd also started consulting for organizations that wanted to build their own networks. Universities trying to improve alumni engagement, professional associations trying to increase member value, companies trying to create executive communities. I taught them the principles. Scarcity creates value. Gatekeeping builds trust. Structure enables serendipity. I showed them how to design application processes, create tiered access, and maintain exclusivity without seeming elitist. I charged $60,000 per consulting engagement and had a 9-month waiting list. I'd become exactly what I'd studied, a gatekeeper, someone whose primary value was controlling access to things others wanted. It was profitable, it was powerful, and it was completely hollow. I still didn't have friends, not real ones. I had members, clients, professional contacts, people who wanted things from me and offered things I wanted in return. Every relationship was transactional, which made them safe because I understood the terms. I lived alone in a brownstone in Georgetown that I'd bought with consulting income. I worked constantly, not because I loved the work, but because I didn't know what else to do with time. I traveled for network events and client meetings, staying in good hotels and eating at expensive restaurants by myself. From the outside, I'm sure it looked like success. From the inside, it felt like an elaborately constructed mechanism to ensure I'd never be vulnerable again. I told myself I was happy, that I'd won, that building something powerful from nothing was its own reward. But sometimes, late at night in hotel rooms in cities where I knew hundreds of people but could call none of them friends, I wondered if I'd actually lost everything that mattered while winning everything that didn't. The message came on a Tuesday in March. I was in Chicago for a conference, staying at a hotel downtown. The Assembly's Chicago chapter was hosting an event that evening, and I had 3 client meetings scheduled before that. The message was from Theodore Rosen. I hadn't heard from him in 12 years, hadn't thought about him consciously in at least 5. But seeing his name on my phone screen triggered something visceral, a full-body response that was part anger, part nausea, part something I couldn't name. The message was brief. Hey man, long time. I'm in Chicago this week. Heard you're doing amazing things with the Assembly. Would love to catch up over coffee and hear about what you're building. Thursday afternoon work? I stared at it for 10 minutes, the presumption of it. Hey man, like we were old friends who just lost touch. Long time, like 12 years, was a quirky gap rather than a deliberate absence. Heard you're doing amazing things, like he had any right to comment on my life. And then the real purpose. Hear about what you're building. He wanted something. Access to the Assembly, or introduction to members, or insight into the network structure for his own purposes. The coffee invitation wasn't about reconnection. It was a business development call, disguised as friendship. I should have deleted it. Should have blocked his number and moved on. Instead, I looked him up. Theodore had done well for himself. After Northwestern, he'd gone to Stanford for an MBA, worked at Google for 3 years, then joined a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Now he was a partner at a mid-tier VC fund that specialized in organizational technology platforms, basically software that helped companies manage people more efficiently. His LinkedIn was carefully curated, photos from conferences, endorsements from entrepreneurs, articles about the future of work. He positioned himself as a thought leader in network-based organizational design. He was building what I'd built, just with worse judgment and VC money. I checked the others. Alexander Feldman was in New York, working at his family's investment firm, married to someone from a similar family, 2 kids, board memberships at cultural institutions. He'd lived exactly the life he'd been born to live. James Hartwell had become a corporate lawyer, partner track at a major firm in Dallas. His bio emphasized mergers and acquisitions, complex commercial litigation, innovative approaches to corporate governance. Charles Donnelly had injured his knee junior year, lost the athletic scholarship, graduated with student debt, and worked in sales for a medical device company in Minneapolis. His LinkedIn was sparse, updated infrequently, no executive polish. They'd all succeeded in various measures. They'd all moved on. None of them had faced consequences for what they'd done. Why would they? They'd learned a valuable lesson at 20. Narrative control matters more than truth, and institutions will believe whoever tells the best story. I sat with Theodore's message for 2 days. Thursday morning I replied, "Sure, there's a coffee place called Intelligentsia on Randolph. 3 p.m. work?" He responded within minutes. "Perfect. Looking forward to it." I spent the intervening time doing research. Not on Theodore, I already knew enough. On his portfolio companies, his partners, his professional network. I mapped where he had influence, what he needed, who he was trying to reach. By the time I walked into the coffee shop Thursday afternoon, I understood exactly why he'd reached out. 2 of his portfolio companies were trying to break into the professional development space, competing directly with platforms that several assembly members had built or advised. He needed access to our network, either to recruit customers or to understand competitive positioning. He couldn't apply for membership. The association with me would disqualify him immediately. But if he could reconnect as an old friend, leverage shared history, maybe I'd be willing to help out anyway. He was running a play, a transparent one. Theodore looked good. Expensive casual. The kind of jeans that cost $400. Sneakers that probably cost more. Hair slightly graying at the temples in a way that read as distinguished rather than old. The confident posture of someone who'd been told yes so many times that he'd forgotten what no felt like. He stood when I approached. Genuine smile, hand extended. "Man, it's so good to see you. You look great." I shook his hand, sat down, waited. "I can't believe it's been 12 years, he continued. "I think about Northwestern sometimes, all the crazy stuff we did. The Innovation Summit, all those late nights. We were so young." "We were," I agreed, tone neutral. "I've been following your career. Well, not following exactly. You're pretty private. But I heard about the assembly through some people in the network space. What you've built is remarkable." "Thank you." He waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. A small flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "So how did you get into it? The network building thing?" Research position in D.C. led to consulting. Consulting revealed a gap in how professional networks functioned. I built something to fill the gap. That's the entrepreneur mindset right there. See the need, build the solution. He was performing enthusiasm, trying to establish rapport. I'm doing similar work on the VC side. We invest in platforms that help people connect and collaborate more effectively. Organizational technology is going to be huge. "Probably," I said. Another pause. He tried a different angle. "I actually wanted to pick your brain about something. One of our portfolio companies is building a professional development platform, trying to create more structured mentorship pathways. I thought you might have insights, given what you've built." There it was, the ask, barely disguised. "What specifically did you want to know?" I asked. "How you maintain quality at scale, how you evaluate members, your thinking on community architecture." He leaned forward, earnest. I'd love to understand your model. Why? Why? Why do you want to understand my model? He blinked. To learn from it. You've solved problems we're trying to solve. I figured we could help each other. How would I be helping you? By sharing experience. And I could offer perspective on the technology side, maybe introduce you to platforms that could help you scale. I don't want to scale, I interrupted. Scarcity is structural. Scale destroys value. Right, but Theodore, I said his name for the first time. What do you actually want? He sat back, recalibrated. When he spoke again, the performance was gone. Access, too, of my portfolio companies would benefit from connection to your network. I can't join myself for obvious reasons, but I thought maybe you'd be willing to facilitate introductions anyway. For old time's sake. Old time's sake, I almost laughed. Tell me about the old times, I said. What? You said for old time's sake. Which old times specifically are you referencing? Theodore looked confused. College, Northwestern, the projects we worked on together. The Innovation Summit. Yeah, among other things. The Innovation Summit where you lost the primary sponsor 6 weeks before the event, created a budget crisis, and then coordinated with James, Alexander, and Charles to blame me for your failures in order to protect your own reputations. His face went carefully blank. That's not how I remember it. How do you remember it? There were disagreements about direction. You wanted to cancel, we wanted to push forward. It got contentious. Nobody acted perfectly. You told the university administration that I had mismanaged finances and threatened sabotage. You provided written statements, 4 of you, independently corroborating the same story. We described our experience. The administration made their own decisions. You lied, I said, systematically and in coordination. You sacrificed me to protect yourselves. Theodore's expression hardened. We were 20 years old. It was a high-pressure situation. People handled it imperfectly. Imperfectly. Yeah, imperfectly. And it was 12 years ago. We were kids. I've thought about it since, and I wish we'd handled things differently, but I can't change the past. Have you thought about it? I asked. Really? Of course. Did you ever consider reaching out, apologizing, acknowledging what actually happened? He shifted uncomfortably. I considered it, but it seemed like opening old wounds for no reason. You've clearly done well for yourself. I figured you'd moved on. I did move on, I said. I moved on from ever trusting anyone enough to be vulnerable again. I moved on from believing institutions care about truth. I moved on from thinking friendship means anything beyond transactional exchange. That's pretty cynical. It's realistic. You taught me that. Theodore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his tone had changed. Less performative, more careful. Look, I understand you're angry. What happened at Northwestern was messy, and you got the worst of it. I own that. But that was a long time ago, and we were different people. I'm trying to approach this as adults who can put the past aside and potentially help each other. I don't need your help. Everyone needs help. That's how professional networks function. You need my help, I corrected. Specifically, you need access to my network for your portfolio companies. That's why you're here. I'm here because I thought we could reconnect. You're here because someone told you I control access to several hundred high-value professionals, and you want to leverage our shared history to bypass the gatekeeping that keeps everyone else out. He didn't deny it. Here's what I'm offering, I continued. Nothing. No access, no introduction, no insight into how the assembly functions. Your portfolio companies can compete in the market without any assistance from me or my network. That seems petty. That seems like maintaining the standards that make the network valuable. By excluding people based on personal grudges? By excluding people based on demonstrated character, I said. You showed me at 20 that you prioritize self-protection over truth, that you'll sacrifice others to maintain your own position, and that you'll rewrite history to justify those choices. Why would I give you access to a network built on trust? Everyone makes mistakes when they're young. This wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy, and it worked for you. You graduated without stain on your record, got into Stanford, built a successful career. The system rewarded exactly the behavior you demonstrated. Theodore's jaw tightened. So what? You're still bitter 12 years later? That's what this is? I'm not bitter, I said, and I meant it. I'm grateful. You taught me how the world actually works. I built everything I have on that lesson. By becoming a gatekeeper who excludes people arbitrarily. By becoming a gatekeeper who maintains standards, I corrected. The assembly functions because members trust that everyone has been vetted, that access isn't granted lightly, that I won't dilute the network's value by letting in whoever asks nicely. And I don't meet your standards. Correct. Theodore stood up. The friendly mask was completely gone now. You know what's funny? I actually felt bad about what happened at Northwestern. I've thought about it over the years, wondered how you were doing, whether we could have handled things differently. I almost reached out a few times, but talked myself out of it. Why did you talk yourself out of it? Because I figured you'd react exactly like this, that you'd be unable to move past something that happened when we were practically kids. And I was right. You were, I agreed. You've built your whole identity around being the victim of that situation. You've let it define you, turned it into the foundation of this whole cynical, transactional approach to relationships. That's not my fault. That's your choice. You're absolutely right, I said. It is my choice. I chose to learn from being betrayed by people I trusted. I chose to build systems that prevent that vulnerability. I chose to create value through scarcity and maintain standards through exclusion. You chose to be alone, he shot back. I chose to be safe, I corrected. There's a difference. Theodore shook his head. This is sad, man. You've clearly built something impressive, but you're using it to settle scores from college. That's pathetic. I'm using it, I said calmly, to maintain standards that make it valuable. You don't meet those standards. That's not personal, it's assessment. Based on one situation 12 years ago, based on how you handled that situation and every choice since. You didn't reach out to apologize. You reached out when you wanted something. That tells me everything about how you view relationships. And how do you view them, he asked. Because from where I'm standing, you don't have relationships. You have transactions you control. Exactly, I said, which means I'm never surprised, never disappointed, and never vulnerable. I call that success. Theodore left without another word. I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, not drinking anything, just sitting. I knew I'd done the right thing. Keeping Theodore out of the assembly was correct from every strategic angle. Letting him in would compromise the network's integrity, create conflicts with existing members, and reward exactly the kind of character I'd designed the system to exclude, but his last words stayed with me. You've built your whole identity around being the victim of that situation. Was that true? I tried to think about who I'd been before Northwestern, the kid who genuinely enjoyed friendship, who trusted people, who believed in collaborative achievement. I could barely remember him. It felt like a different person, someone naive and foolish who'd been destroyed by his own ignorance. Had I built my entire adult life as a response to one betrayal? Or had that betrayal simply revealed truths I needed to learn? That trust was weakness, that institutions didn't care about truth, that power came from controlling access rather than providing value? I genuinely didn't know. The next message came 6 days later. James Hartwell. Heard you saw Theodore in Chicago. I'm in D.C. next month for a conference. Would be good to connect. Then Alexander, 3 days after that. Long time no talk. I've been meaning to reach out for years. Coffee sometime? They'd coordinated this. Theodore had reported back, and now they were all making contact, probably after discussing strategy together. They wanted something: access, insight, leverage. They'd decided to approach individually, making it seem organic rather than planned. It was exactly the kind of manipulation they'd pulled at 20, just with better execution. I replied to both with the same message. I don't think we have anything to discuss. James pushed back. Come on, we were friends once. Water under the bridge? Were we friends? I wrote back. Or were you invested in maintaining a useful relationship until it became inconvenient? He didn't respond. Alexander tried a different approach. I know things ended badly at Northwestern. I've felt guilty about it for years. I'd like a chance to apologize properly. I almost believed him. Almost. I appreciate the sentiment, I wrote, but I'm not interested in revisiting the past. I hope you understand. I don't, honestly, he replied, but I respect your decision. At least he had the grace to accept the boundary. Charles was last. His message was different. Shorter, less polished. I know I don't have any right to ask this, but I need help. Can we talk? I sat with it for 2 days before responding. What kind of help? Job situation. I'm trying to break into a new field, and I'm hitting walls everywhere. Someone mentioned, people in professional development. I thought maybe you could point me toward opportunities. Of course, Charles, who'd always been the least privileged of the group, who'd lost his athletic scholarship and never quite recovered. He was struggling now, reaching out to anyone who might help, including someone he'd betrayed 12 years ago. The others had wanted access to expand their already successful careers. Charles needed access to survive. Part of me, a small, vindictive part, wanted to tell him no, to let him experience what it felt like to need help and have doors closed because of choices made years earlier. But mostly I just felt tired. I can't help you, I wrote back. Not because of what happened at Northwestern, but because helping you would compromise my professional credibility. I maintain strict boundaries between personal history and business relationships. I'm sure you understand. I understand, he replied. Thanks for responding. It was the saddest exchange of all of them. Over the following months, I thought about those messages more than I wanted to. The assembly continued growing. I expanded to 2 more cities, developed a fellowship program for emerging professionals, started an annual conference that became the most sought-after invitation in professional development circles. From every external measure, I was succeeding beyond any reasonable expectation. But Theodore's accusation haunted me. You've built your whole identity around being the victim of that situation. Had I? I looked at my life with the kind of analytical distance I usually reserved for network mapping. What did I actually have? A powerful professional network that I controlled completely, substantial wealth from consulting, a reputation as one of the most selective gatekeepers in professional circles, the ability to open or close doors for hundreds of people with a single decision, and no one I could call at 2 a.m., no one who knew me beyond my professional persona, no relationship that existed for its own sake rather than strategic value. I'd built an empire of controlled access and lived alone in the center of it. I started doing something I'd never done before. I went to therapy. Not because I thought I was broken, but because I genuinely wanted to understand whether I'd made the right choices. Dr. Joanna Sinclair was in her 60s, a clinical psychologist who specialized in high-achieving professionals dealing with isolation and relationship difficulties. I found her through a colleague who'd mentioned her work in confidence. "Tell me why you're here," she said in our first session. I explained the Northwestern situation, the betrayal, the institutional failure, the 12 years since, the network I'd built, and the life I'd constructed. And recently, she prompted. I told her about Theodore's message, about refusing him access, about the others reaching out, about Charles. How did it feel to refuse them? She asked. Correct, I said. It felt correct. Did it feel good? I considered that. No, it felt necessary. We sat in silence for a moment. Let me ask you something, Dr. Sinclair said. If you could go back to that moment at Northwestern, knowing everything you know now, what would you do differently? I'd document everything before confronting them. I'd go to administration immediately with evidence rather than giving them time to coordinate their story. I'd protect myself strategically. You wouldn't try to maintain the friendship. The friendship was already gone the moment they decided to sacrifice me. I just didn't see it yet. And now, is refusing them access about maintaining professional standards, or about making sure they experience consequences they avoided 12 years ago? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped, because I honestly didn't know. We worked together for 8 months. Dr. Sinclair didn't try to convince me I was wrong about anything. She didn't push me to forgive Theodore and the others. Didn't suggest I was being petty or vindictive. She just asked questions. What would it look like to build a relationship that wasn't transactional? How do you distinguish between healthy boundaries and total isolation? What does safety actually require versus what does fear require? If you never let anyone close enough to hurt you, can you let anyone close enough to matter? Slowly, I started seeing the architecture I'd built more clearly. The assembly wasn't just a professional network, it was a fortress. Every gate I controlled, every standard I maintained, every person I excluded, it was all designed to ensure I'd never be vulnerable again. I'd built exactly what I thought I needed to be safe, and I'd been very, very good at it. But safe from what? I hadn't had a real friend in 12 years. I'd dated occasionally, but never let anyone pass surface level. I'd built a career helping people connect while refusing connection myself. I'd won the game Theodore and the others had started. I'd accumulated more power, more control, more success than any of them. I could exclude them permanently, make them feel small and irrelevant, demonstrate that their choices had consequences. But I was also alone in a way they probably weren't. They'd moved on, built lives, maintained relationships. They'd probably learned from Northwestern too, just different lessons. They'd hurt me, protected themselves, and continued living. I'd been hurt, protected myself, and stopped living. So what do? I asked Dr. Sinclair in one of our later sessions. What do you want to do? I don't know. I can't let them into the assembly. That actually would compromise everything I've built. But refusing them felt hollow, like winning a game nobody else is playing anymore. Maybe, she said gently, the question isn't about them at all. Maybe it's about whether you want to keep playing the game. I didn't change everything. I didn't forgive Theodore, James, Alexander, or Charles. I didn't grant them access to the assembly or help their careers. I didn't reach out to repair relationships that had been destroyed 12 years earlier. But I started making small changes. I accepted a dinner invitation from a colleague that wasn't about business. I joined a book club, actual books, no professional development, just people who liked reading. I started saying yes to social invitations that had no strategic value. I was terrible at it. I kept analyzing dynamics, looking for angles, wondering what people wanted. But slowly, over months, I remembered how to just exist with people without needing to control the interaction. I even started dating someone, Eleanor's daughter actually, who was a civil rights attorney and had no interest in professional networks. We met at Eleanor's retirement party. She asked me about my work, and when I started explaining the assembly's architecture, she interrupted. That sounds lonely, she said. It's strategic, I corrected. It sounds like both. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months now. It was uncomfortable and scary, and I had no idea if it would work. But it was also the first relationship I'd had in 12 years that felt real. The assembly continued operating. I didn't change the standards or relax the gatekeeping. If anything, I became more thoughtful about what the network was for, creating genuine value rather than just demonstrating my power to exclude. I was still a gatekeeper, but I was trying to be one who opened doors rather than one who proved he could keep them closed. A year after Theodore's message, I got an email from Charles. I wanted to let you know I found something. Not through you, I understand why you couldn't help. But I landed a position at a nonprofit doing workforce development. It's not glamorous, but it's good work. I also wanted to say I'm sorry. I've thought about Northwestern a lot over the years, especially recently. What we did to you was wrong. I was scared and weak, and I went along with something I knew was unjust because it was easier than standing alone. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I know. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back. Thank you for saying that. It matters. I hope the new position works out. That was all. No reconciliation, no invitation to reconnect, no absolution, just acknowledgement. But it felt like something loosening, slightly. A pressure I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing it. Theodore, James, and Alexander never apologized. Maybe they didn't think they'd done anything wrong. Maybe they'd justified it so thoroughly over the years that they genuinely believed their own version of events. Maybe they just didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. I'd spent 12 years building power to protect myself from people who weren't thinking about me at all. I'd won a competition they'd stopped playing the moment they graduated. I'd achieved the ultimate revenge, becoming more successful, more powerful, more relevant than any of them, and discovered it was empty. The real cost of Northwestern wasn't what they did to me. It was what I did to myself in response. I built walls so high that I couldn't see over them. I created systems so controlled that I suffocated inside them. I became so good at protecting myself that I forgot what I was protecting. Dr. Sinclair asked me once, if you could go back and prevent the Northwestern situation entirely, if you could make it so you were never betrayed, would you? Yes, I said immediately. Even knowing it led to everything you've built, the assembly, your career, your expertise. I sat with that. I don't know, I finally admitted. I've built something valuable, but I'm not sure the cost was worth it. What was the cost? 12 years of not trusting anyone. 12 years of being alone while surrounded by people. 12 years of choosing safety over connection. And now I'm trying to figure out if you can rebuild trust after you've spent that long learning not to. Can you? I don't know, I said, but I'm trying. The assembly is still invitation only. I still control every membership decision. I still maintain the standards that make the network valuable. But I've started building other things too. Things that aren't about control or exclusion or proving I can't be hurt. I mentor young professionals, actually helping them rather than just evaluating their utility. I've funded scholarships for students in organizational behavior. I volunteer with a nonprofit that helps people rebuild careers after institutional failures. I'm trying to create the support structure I needed at 20 and didn't have. It doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't forgive what they did. But it means Northwestern isn't the only thing I'm building from anymore. Sometimes I still see their names. Theodore raised a new fund. James made partner. Alexander sits on prestigious boards. They're all successful, well-connected, probably happy. They won, by any reasonable measure. They protected themselves, avoided consequences, and built good lives. But I don't check their LinkedIn profiles anymore. I don't track their careers or imagine scenarios where they need my help and I refuse. I don't fantasize about them realizing how powerful I've become and feeling small. I just live my life, build my network, try to be someone who uses power to include rather than exclude, who creates opportunity rather than just controlling it. The doors of the assembly remain closed to them. That's not punishment, it's just reality. I built something that requires trust, and I can't trust people who showed me they'll sacrifice others to protect themselves. But those closed doors don't define me anymore. Last month, I got a message from a student at Northwestern. She was studying organizational behavior, working on her senior thesis about professional network formation. Someone had mentioned the assembly, and she wanted to interview me about how I built it. We talked for 90 minutes. She asked thoughtful questions about network theory, gatekeeping mechanisms, value creation through scarcity. She reminded me of myself at that age, curious, idealistic, believing that good work would be recognized. At the end, she asked, "What's the most important lesson you've learned about building communities?" I thought about it. Thought about Theodore and betrayal and 12 years of isolation. Thought about walls and fortresses and choosing safety over connection. Thought about what I'd built and what it cost and whether I'd do it differently. Trust is earned, I said, but isolation is chosen. The hard part is knowing when you're protecting yourself and when you're just hiding. She wrote it down carefully, thanked me, and left. I sat in my office afterward, looking at the member database. Hundreds of names, thousands of connections, a network that spanned cities and industries and influenced countless careers. I had built something real, something valuable, something that helped people. But I'd also built something else, a fortress that kept me safe and kept me alone. The question I was still learning to answer was whether I could maintain the first without requiring the second. I think about that night at Northwestern sometimes, standing in front of administrators who believed 4 coordinated lies over one truth, walking out knowing my reputation was destroyed and there was nothing I could do about it. The moment of realizing that friendship meant nothing, that institutions didn't care about justice, that power flowed to those who controlled narrative. I think about who I was before that night, trusting, collaborative, believing in shared achievement, and who I became after, isolated, strategic, building systems to ensure I'd never be vulnerable again. Part of me mourns that earlier version. He was naive, but he was also happy in ways I haven't been since. But part of me is grateful for what I learned. I understand power now. I understand how systems work. I understand that safety requires architecture, that access is currency, that gatekeeping is control. I just wish I'd learned those lessons without forgetting how to trust anyone. Theodore and the others taught me that people will sacrifice you to protect themselves, that friendship is conditional, that when institutional pressure comes, most people choose self-preservation over loyalty. They were right. That is how many people operate. But they also taught me, inadvertently, that you can build an entire life around avoiding vulnerability and end up more damaged than if you just risked being hurt again. I spent 12 years proving I couldn't be touched. I accumulated power, influence, control. I became someone who decided who got access to opportunity, who got included in valuable rooms, who got the benefit of my network. I won. And I lost something more important in the process. Now I'm trying to find balance, to maintain standards without needing to prove I can exclude people, to build value without requiring fortress walls, to trust selectively rather than not at all. It's harder than building the assembly was, harder than accumulating power, harder than anything I've done, because it requires admitting that I spent 12 years running from something that already happened, building defenses against attacks that weren't coming anymore, winning a war that ended the night they betrayed me. The assembly will keep operating. The standards will remain high. The membership will stay selective. But I'm not doing it to prove anything anymore. Not to Theodore, not to the administrators who believed his lies, not to the institutional structures that failed me. I'm doing it because curated networks create real value, because gatekeeping can be service when done thoughtfully, because some things should be exclusive to maintain quality. I'm doing it because it's good work, not because it's safe work. And maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's how you know you've actually moved forward, rather than just building more elaborate defenses. When the work serves the community rather than serving your need to be untouchable. When the power creates opportunity rather than just proving you can withhold it. When you close doors because they should be closed, not because you need to demonstrate that you can. I saw Alexander's name in the news recently. His family's firm donated $10 million to Northwestern for a new business school building. They'll probably put his name on something, a classroom maybe, or a conference room where future students will plan ambitious projects together. I thought about reaching out, writing a note congratulating him, or maybe asking if he ever thought about that night when we destroyed someone's life to protect our own careers. But I didn't. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not really, and not to punish him. He doesn't care whether I approve of his philanthropy. I didn't reach out because we genuinely have nothing to say to each other. He's building his legacy at the institution where we betrayed someone together. I'm building something that explicitly excludes him from access. We're both successful. We're both fine. We've both moved on. We just moved in completely different directions, starting from the same moment of choosing self-protection over truth. And maybe that's the real ending. Not revenge, not reconciliation, not dramatic confrontation. Just two people who were friends once, made different choices under pressure, and built completely separate lives on opposite sides of a door that will never open. I still run the assembly. I still control who gets in. And Theodore, James, Alexander, and Charles still don't. That's not victory, it's just architecture. The victory would have been building all of this without needing to. Building connection instead of control. Building community instead of fortress. But I didn't know how to do that at 22. And by the time I learned, 12 years had passed and the fortress was complete. So now I live in what I built. Impressive, powerful, and infinitely lonely unless I choose, every day, to open the doors I installed to keep myself safe. Some days I do, some days I don't. But at least now I know it's a choice, not a defense. At least now I know that winning meant becoming exactly what I needed to become to avoid losing again, and that being untouchable is just another way of being alone. They taught me that. Theodore, James, Alexander, and Charles. And I can never thank them for it, because gratitude would require access. And access is the one thing I'll never give them. Not because I'm angry, but because some doors stay closed not as punishment, but as principle. And I spent 12 years learning the difference. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.